Greetings from Irwin, Tennessee, where a forgotten steam engine built in 1882 was proudly rebuilt by Clinchfield railroaders into an American success story and a media sensation. The rebuilt Clinchfield #1 from 1968 until 1979 took thousands on excursions throughout the South. Read more about it in the one and only A Pictorial History of the Clinchfield #1 and a full written history in Tennessee's legendary steam engine.
Hi, my name is Amy Elias, and I really have the unique honor today of sitting down with Joy Harjo, someone for whom I have an immense amount of admiration, both as a thinker and a prophet and a poet who speaks forcefully and compassionately about Native nations' experiences in the world, and also about poetry and song as the bedrock of ethical life. I would say that at the beginning of this session today that I wanted to welcome everyone on behalf of Humanities Tennessee and thank our key sponsors, Metro Nashville, the Arts Commission, Metro Nashville Arts Commission, the Ingram Content Group, the Tennessee Arts Commission, Vanderbilt University, and Parnassus Books. There are links being posted in the chat to buy the book, authors' books from Parnassus, which helps to keep the festival free. And so there'll be there'll also be a donate button posted if people wish to support the festival after this session. So I'd like to introduce our guest today. As I said, I'm really honored to be able to do this. Joy Harjo is a Muscogee poet, a musician, writer, and playwright, and performer. She was appointed the 23rd Poet Laureate of the United States in 2019. As a Muscogee author, she is the author of 9 books of poetry, including her most recent, An American Sunrise. She's been honored with the 2017 Ruth Lilly Prize from the Poetry Foundation, the Wallace Stevens Award from the Academy of American Poets, and a Guggenheim Fellowship. Her memoir, Crazy Brave, won the PEN USA Literary Award for Creative Nonfiction. Her music has been awarded a Native American Music Award, a NAMI, for the Best Female Artist of the Year in 2009. She's co-founder with Jennifer Elise Forster of an arts membership program for Muscogee citizens. It's really my pleasure today to welcome Joy. And the way this session we just decided will run is that Joy will give a reading of some of her poetry, and then Joy and I will talk for about 15 or 20 minutes about An American Sunrise and her other music and poetry. And then we'll have an open session Q&A. We can only meet for 45 minutes today, so do you have your questions ready to go? Again, it's my pleasure to welcome Joy Harjo.
Well, it's good to be here, and thank you. Here, I'm imagining myself in Tennessee right now, beautiful Tennessee. Here for me right now is Tulsa, Oklahoma. I have a Tulsa Artist Fellowship here, and it is my birthplace, and I'm right next door. You can't see it. It's a great Art Deco building that used to be the train station that is now the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame, and that's my hangout. Or it was until the pandemic. So yeah, right now I'm working on a new album of music called This Morning I Pray for My Enemies. And I guess from the beginning, for me, poetry was always connected with music. My mother used to write songs and loved poetry and used to quote William Blake poems. And the poems that she learned through 8th grade in a small one-room schoolhouse in Arkansas, the border of Arkansas and Oklahoma. So they're always together. I think if you look at any poetry tradition, you always find us right back with song And dance is always there too. This is called Singing Everything. And this poem came about, I was thinking about how, diversity. There's, I think about diversity in songs or diversity in poems. And with songs, it seems like 95% of our songs are falling in love, falling out of love. But, we have songs, there can be songs for everything. Just like there can be poems. What I love about poetry is you can hold a country's grief in a poem, a person. So you can hold death in a poem. It's a place to put so many things made with words. Singing Everything. Once there were songs for everything. Songs for planting, for growing, for harvesting, for eating, getting drunk, falling asleep, for sunrise, birth, mind break, and war. For death, those are the heaviest songs, and they have to be pried from the earth with shovels of grief. Now, all we hear are falling in love songs and falling apart after falling in love songs. The earth is leaning sideways, and a song is emerging from the floods and fires. Urgent tendrils lift toward the sun. You must be friends with silence to hear. The songs of the guardians of silence are the most powerful. They are the most rare. Okay. I hadn't read that one out loud in a long time. The next one I wrote while I was living in Knoxville, Tennessee, and holding a chair of excellence at University of Tennessee. And I lived in some condos. We got a condo you could look across the Tennessee River, and my great-grandfather, I'm 6 generations from Manawi, he and his warriors used to stand there and look out to see where the best horses were. But it was beautiful. We could look over and see the Smokies, and it's a beautiful area. And I wrote this when my friend, Cherokee, she's Eastern Band Cherokee, basket maker, was dying. Well, I wrote this the morning I heard that she had gone. I've kept all of my text from her. She's brilliant. She took basket making to another level, incorporating words, stories, texts, treaties in the weave. And she has a show that opens, I think, next week at the Gilcrease Museum here in Tulsa. It's going to be virtual, so you might want to catch it. First Morning for Shan Goshen, December 3rd, 2018. This is the first morning we are without you on earth. The sun greeted us after a week of rain in your eastern green and mountain homelands. Plants are fed, the river restored, and you have been woven into a path of embracing stars of all colors, now free of the suffering that shapes us here. We all learn to let go, like learning how to walk when we first arrive here. All those you thought you lost now circle you, and you are free of pain and heartbreak. Don't look back, keep going. We will carry your memory here until we join you in just a little while, in one blink of star time. This next one, and I realize that what I do sometimes in my poems, everything I was told not to do, I use words like love. I'll even put a star in there, all the words that we were forbidden to use when I was a grad student. This is called My Man's Feet. And this is one of my favorite poems in here. It's kind of a love poem, but it's actually, I guess you could call it an ode to my husband's feet. And I wrote it in Tennessee. It's about, you think about how it was so ironic to, I wrote this book when I was getting ready to leave and wondering, what did I learn here? What am I taking back? And I thought about how we all the walk from there, being forced by gunpoint from our homes in Georgia, Alabama, up into Tennessee for some. Our families are from Georgia and Alabama. And I thought about that walk and Tennessee and just all of it. My man's feet. They are heroic roots. You cannot mistake them for any other 6-foot walker. I could find them in a sea of feet, a planet or universe of feet. They kicked the sky at birth in the town his great-grandfather found. My man's feet left childhood, past the mineral grit of an oil flush bust, to these atomic eastbound lands. His feet are made of his mother's spiritual concern and of his father, historic and mindfully upright. What walkers! From mound builder steps that led to the sky maker, past Spanish galleons, stagecoach, and railroad snaker. One generation following another, no other feet but these could bear the rock's stubborn, loyal bear, towering intelligence and children picker-upper. That is the one who owns these feet. What an anchor his feet provide for his unmatched invincibility and get-up-again-ality. I've danced behind this man in the stomp dance circle, our feet beating rhythm together, man, woman, boy, girl, sun and moon jumper. My man's feet are the pure steps of a father looking after his sons, his daughters. For when he laughs, he opens all the doors of his heart, of our hearts, even as he forgets to shut them when he leaves. And when he grieves for those he loves, he carves out valleys enough to hold everyone's tears with his feet, these feet, my man's widely humble, ever steady, beautiful, brown feet. I've been thinking a lot since I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is an amazing jazz musician, singer, bass player, etc. We're talking about, I guess she said she's making the connection in her practice of her music that jazz was made for dancing. I mean, the link was so strong there. And I thought about that a lot. I love dance. And I've been rereading my memoir because I just wrote a new memoir that it will be out next September. And I realized that I write by rhythm. You know, it's very musical, but I write by phrasing. I'm a horn player too. And, you know, a lot of that, there's that phrasing. It's about phrasing and patterns, patterning. I guess I'll close with the short reading with An American Sunrise. This is a golden shovel form invented by Terrence Hayes, and at the end word of every line is from a very famous Gwendolyn Brooks poem. Real cool. An American Sunrise. We were running out of breath as we ran to meet ourselves. We were surfacing the edge of our ancestors' fights and ready to strike. It was difficult to lose days in the Indian bar if you were straight. Easy if you played pool and drank to remember to forget. We made plans to be professional and did, and some of us could sing. When we drove to the edge of the mountains with the drum, we made sense of our beautiful crazed lives under the starry stars. Sin was invented by the Christians, as was the devil, we sang. We were the heathens and needed to be saved from them. Thin chance. We knew we were all related in this story. A little gin will clarify the dark and make us all feel like dancing. We had something to do with the origins of blues and jazz. I argued with the music as I filled the jukebox with dimes in June. 40 years later, and we still want justice. We are still America. We.
Thank you, Joe. It's amazing. And I thought you read all of my favorites in this collection. I thought maybe we could start with that last thought. One of the things about that Gwendolyn Brooks insertion or conversation that you're having in that poem with her poem, right? I was wondering about the voices and references that are in your poem, this collection. You have N. Scott Momaday, you have art by T.C. Cannon, you have Emily Dickinson enters into this collection, which I thought was really interesting. You write a poem to her, as well as reprinting one of her poems. You have the WPA interviews with Elsie Edwards, and then artist Shane Goshorn. So I was wondering about if you could talk about the voices and the art references in this text that you're in conversation with, and what those voices have in common to you, or how they're part of the landscape that you voice in the volume.
Okay, well, I guess I see about 5 different ways that I can enter this. One, I think every poem has ancestors. I taught a class like that once at UTK in undergrad, where everyone brought in a poem that they loved. And of course I had to tell them, it can't be your own poem. It has to be a poem from a known poet. And then we started tracing ancestors. We made ancestor maps. And we read a lot of poetry. That's what was great about it, is then we were reading all their influences, and then you were making connections. So all of these poets and people have, and of course, Emily Dickinson was one of the first poets that I read and recognized, whose voice I recognized and loved in a collection of Louis Untermeyer poetry. And then Gwendolyn Brooks, of course, what do you say? She's like a goddess. And I love that form and working with that form, and that poem does reference, it's like our version of hanging out at the Golden Shovel, but at the Golden, not the Golden Shovel, the bar, the name of that, where the pool players are hanging out. But yeah, we have pool players too. But so there was that reference. But I think about all the voices, I was thinking about too, returning to the Southeast, into the heartlands of the Southeast, and all the voices. When I was writing this, of course, Claudia Rankine's book was Citizen, stirred things up. But I also thought about how, and it's always influenced me, is about how, she wasn't the first one to do something like that. I think about in Scott Momaday's The Way to Rainy Mountain, which I think influenced Leslie Silko in her book Storyteller. We have a lot of different voices. I mean, you can do it. I mean, storytellers wove storytelling, fiction, images too. She also included images, photographs, some of her father's. I have a poem by my daughter in this book, my daughter Rainey. And to show a little bit of the generational thing. It wasn't overt, but there's in a poem. I mean, if you start taking it to layers and layering it, any poem, there's influences and voices.
Yeah, I love that idea of ancestors rather than the critics talk about influences, and that's such a sterile concept, whereas ancestors, that's a living concept. And I really love that move that you're making there. But you know what else in the book itself you talk, and also in your memoir, in Crazy Brave, and elsewhere in your poetry, you talk about poetry itself as sort of a voice. You link it, I think, in Crazy Brave to the knowing that you talk about, as if poetry has a voice, or there's something about poetry that speaks. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit. What's the voice of poetry that you seem to connect with?
I think for the longest time, I mean, poetry too, for me, it's such the writing of it. Yes, we can go into a class and you can learn craft and tools and how people do this, that, and the other. But I would venture that most poets don't, maybe some of them, if you're writing to a form, but even then something else takes over. I enjoy that. I have in conflict resolution for holy beings, I have a sestina. Sometimes I make my own forms. I like writing towards a form, but even then, there's always something. I mean, you can craft up the kazoo and this, that, and the other, but there's something else the spirit of the poem, that is something, that is something you cannot, I mean, where is that? Where does that come from? The voice. I have a lot of young people, even in a video thing the other day, with questions, how do I find my voice? It's like your voice is there. You're animated. You're in a body that is animated. It's there. You just, it's there. So I guess for a long time, I had a hard time teaching because for me, the process was just so not mysterious. I knew how to work it and know how to go into there, but how do you teach that? And how do you open it? I've learned you can open the door, and sometimes craft help. If you have those tools, then you can open all kinds of doors, make all kinds of shapes.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know I'm going far afield. So
no, that's exactly right. I'm really curious about the spirit of that, connecting to the voices within you, that as a poet. And something else that you talk about in Crazy Brave about this knowing is, you say it's a powerful warning system that stepped forth when I was in danger, and it was always right. It stood watch over me. Are they the same things, the voice of poetry and this voice of knowing, or do they come from the same place?
probably from a similar place, but they're not always the same thing. I think my voice, like speaking right now, the voice of the poetry and the voice of my saxophone, it's the same voice. It's that sometimes there are different influences in it, and there's different influences that come in, or, like anything, I think a voice is not static. It can grow, and I think it does have roots. Like, I was talking to a friend of mine, she's my tribe, and we were talking about a lot of things, about genealogy, which is history, tribal history, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, and we were talking about, she'd done all this DNA, and I know, so I haven't done the DNA thing, but I know a lot of my relatives. And I said, I've been I'm a great grandmother now, and I've watched, it's like you watch generations of poets. You could be a great great grandpoet or something, but you watch these generations and you see that there's a void, that it's like, I've learned that DNA wants to live. I have watched this where a child appears to be exactly like someone else in the family 3 or 4 generations ago, and even their racial mix is different, and they'll come out looking just like that grandparent when it seems impossible, a given.
Yeah.
And I think it's that same way with voices. And that's what we were talking about. I said, my voice has been here with me since I was really, it's just been me, but it comes directly. I know it comes out of this Muscogee Creek line. I know those people, they're all connected to this voice. Yeah. And so I don't know exactly how it works. Some voices become voices of an age, some of a place. I think about Jeffers, is this out in the California coast, and some voices exist because of a particular place and land or time, or it's I don't know. I was thinking about that, but I don't know exactly how it works.
Yeah, I don't think any of us do, but I'm fascinated in your work, how that's linked to song and to music. As well. Those are voices. There's a great line, I'm going to pull it up because I love it. This is from Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. And you say, whenever a saxophone begins to sing in a story, we know that for a time we will no longer move about so lonely here, far away from the house of the sun, the moon, and the stars. It's beautiful, but also it's that meshing of knowing and being and sound and song and music that you bring together in the poetry and in your music. I was just wondering if you could just riff on that for a little bit. The music of the song of your tradition and the music of jazz and blues, and the music of the soul that you're talking about of poetry sort of come together somehow.
Oh man.
Sorry.
I'll know when I'm done, I guess, because I don't want to know too much, because I'm working. When I write something, whether it's poetry or music, I don't know where I'm going, and I can't. Otherwise it blows it. It's about finding. It's about discovering and rediscovering certain things. I've been much freer in my poetry than I have with music, and now I'm starting to free up in music, and it's very exciting. I think I had too much head stuff going. I didn't start performing music and writing music until I was in my 40s. And because I left it when I was around 15, 16, I walked away from it all. And yet here it was in poetry. Well, then I was in dance. I was in a drama dance troupe. And so it's all connected. Yeah, the Southeast, I'm after this memoir is out and then this new album of music, I have a musical I'm working on, and Esperanza Spalding's going to collaborate with the music with me on that. And it's a story, involving a young band of musicians, mostly Muscogee Creek, not all, but they all have stories that are part of Tulsa and part of the story of blues and jazz. And they're going to be discovering that story as they're in the middle of things. And, Congo Square was a Muscogean village. I mean, that's usually left out of the story.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there you go. I can just see the whole thing. Somebody heard me say that, and I just sent me a book they wrote on Congo Square, which I forget his name. I just left it over in my studio. But people forget that. And so we're part of the origin story. And there's something in me, and you don't always know what you're doing or how it's going to wind up time-wise, but Crazy Brave opens with that story of that kind of cosmic consciousness experience I had as a child hearing Miles Davis.
Yeah.
On the radio, and it's like, whoa, with jazz. I mean, I didn't know those words, or it's something I've come to through the years, is that there was something about that kind of music that just keeps opening doors. But my friend brought it back to me with dance, because I think with all these programs, I mean, like, I think maybe creative writing programs can be the same way, but like learning jazz getting a degree in jazz, which is cool that you can, and it's in the institutions, but what happens to, what happens to the music, or, to the visceralness, to, it's like, I heard Wayne Shorter say in a video recently, and he was saying, all these cats, and it's the same thing with poetry and poetry workshops and so on, and there's a hierarchy, and there's major attitude, like all these cats, and here they are, they can play, they can do this, they can play, they can talk poetry theory, they can play like, but what do they, what do they have to say?
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, because, and this I'm quoting from Crazy Brave, in those pages that you mentioned at the beginning, you write, music is a language that lives in the spiritual realms. We can hear it, we can notate it, we could create it, but we cannot hold it in our hands. Music can help raise a people or call them together for war. That notion of, an academic, I'm a critic, right? So we try to hold things in our hands, and we kill them oftentimes by doing that.
I know, I have that tendency. I think I'm half intuition and half so analytical that I get in my way, that it, my mind, taking things apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we talk about the book in the couple minutes we have left as well. Going back to American Sunrise for a moment, I just wanted to ask you about the movement of the book. There's a lot of, as I noted to you, there's a lot of mourning, in the text. And there's also like a lot of freeing of mourning. There's a lot of, there's a tension, right, between poems, like Washing My Mother's Body, where it's a poem about reconciling, right, and a kind of mourning.
Yeah.
And then poems like, My Man's Feet, right, which is filled with joy and something else. And so I wanted to ask you about that, is how do you see the tension in this volume between mourning and hope, or a forward-thinking horizon look?
I think we humans embody such contradictions, just as history embodies contradictions, and coming back to our homelands and then being excited about going home to Oklahoma, that's a major contradiction. It's like we came there and drove everywhere. I'm always studying. I always tell non-poets, we don't just, get inspired and there's a poem. There's a lot that goes into it. I'm always researching and learning. I mean, that's part of this journey. But let's see. Remind me the question again here.
Yeah, I'll just ask you a different one. This book, you said you came back to Tennessee, right, when you wrote this volume, American Sunrise. So I was wondering what you found in Tennessee when you got there.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, the contradictions. So I wrote this book too, thinking about, the history there, and about my grandfather standing up over that, walking right where I walked, and what his life was like. And I include his map, the map of him being, forced the trail that he went back. Mm-hmm. He and his family went back. And yet it was so, when we got there, it's so strange. We had all the stories, and I'd been, through the area off and on through the years, as had my husband, but you go there and your people aren't there. Yeah. You go to your homes, you go to these lands. We have the stories about them. You can find on a map, this was all mostly Creek. A lot of people, there were some Cherokees in Tennessee, but it was mostly Creek. A lot of those names down to the Overhill towns, those are all Creek words. And all up and down that Tennessee River, all that area, and then we go there. There are none of often my husband and I felt like we were on a little island. We were became advisors for the Native Student Club, but it was the strangest thing. It's like going and finding the whole land, which is kind of a house, gutted, and nobody's left. So that's the mourning. I mean, it goes on, and it goes on in our bodies and even into Oklahoma. And then the joy, so beautiful, all those lands. I was ready to stay in Columbus, Georgia. I have family from down there. And people really need to get these crappy images of natives out of their heads. We're human beings. And I had an uncle. I know my aunt had told me we're related to Patty Carr. Patty Carr down there had the largest horse racing events and grounds down there in Columbus, Georgia, all the eastern seaboard. He was pretty wealthy, and his brother is my grandfather. And so we were running around down there and saw some of his houses. He had a lot of houses. So, we weren't these people just hiding in the woods, uncivilized, who needed to be civilized. And we had our ways. We have our ways. We still have them. So the joy. So that's a contradiction, to go there, and now here we were excited about going back to Oklahoma. It's because the people were there, our people. But it's strange. How do we embody those? I mean, that's a direct, and maybe the book history will always embody contradictions. Why about, and then the joy. The lands are so beautiful. And the people, there's a lot of humor with our people. I don't think the outside world sees it quite so much, but a tremendous amount of, almost everybody's funny. It becomes a way to survive.
I don't know if we have questions at this point from our listeners. I certainly can keep going. So since we're here, one of the things we can talk about is you dedicate one of the poems in this volume to I believe Adrienne Rich.
Yeah.
And you write, and I love this line: "We're in the apocalyptic age of addiction and forgetting. It's worse now." So I'm wondering if you could talk about "It's worse now," right? A little bit. Yeah, I mean, you were active in the Red Power movement. You've been a voice for Indian people all your life, and that activism. What do you think is a goal we should be striving for now in this apocalyptic age of forgetting?
Well, when I think about Adrienne Rich, I think of her bravery. I think of her fierce bravery. And she was always willing to look deeply with her eyes open. And I remember looking at her once, looking straight into her eyes. She was a mentor. You talk about impeccable poet, and looking, and there was such depth beyond. It is almost terrifying to be, to look into those kind of eyes that can see so utterly deeply. She saw into the American psyche. She loved this people in the country. And so when I was writing that poem, I was thinking, yes, it is worse now. I mean, I think about our generation and all that we did to all of our hard work is for social change and racial justice, all of it. And it all seems to be undone. It seems like, but I've watched that through generations of children, through generations of poets, and it's like it goes, the weave is there, but the changes are incremental, and sometimes we have to go back. And I think the wound in this country is immense. And part of if a wound can have a heart, I have a line in my new memoirs that says, even the monster has a story. Is that even, there's that a lot of that wounding has its origins in the South. And it has a lot to do with the misuse of human beings and destruction and massacre and slavery and things and hierarchies and things that people tell themselves just because they were, they wanted land or dominion or were afraid or didn't think. I mean, sometimes we're all guilty of it, where you just say, this is what I want. I'm not going to think about, the consequences. It's about, we find ways. That's when the mind is separated from the heart. Mind can do all kinds of things without the heart. I see a question.
That's really.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I see a question that came up.
Yes, I was going to say from it's about, I think, the voice that we were talking about before. How much and in what ways do you think the voice changes over time and age? Is there always one note that remains true to the beginning point, or do we always move deeper into the land of our ancestors?
That's a really good question, and I think it almost answers itself, Mariella. Is like, I think my new memoir, which is called Poet Warrior, A Call for Love and Justice, it's like me standing here looking back at what I've learned through teachers, and I address many of my teachers, which aren't always people. And so I think my voice, the voice in it's still the same voice as Crazy Brave, but it's different. It is a voice that is aware of the door opening to the other side. I mean, when you get to my age, and I'm, in my late 60s, you're aware, you're standing at a much different point in the story than if you're in your 40s or 30s, and of course the voice will, the voice accommodates time and age, generally. I think there is one note. I mean, we are who we are. You can look pictures of people as when they were little babies, even there it is, there you are, there's that essence that is you that remains. But I think we're always moving deeper and deeper into maybe the land of our ancestors, and I don't think it's linear. I don't think time is linear like that.
I'm just going to give you some of the questions that are popping up because people are very interested in what you have to say. So one of the questions from Devin is, has being a poet laureate inhibited your freedom to speak to political or societal issues at all?
Somewhat, yes, because I'm not a government employee. It's called a special government employee. So
really,
city government, yes. even though I'm not, like on the, it's different. It's a different kind of position, but you have the same strictures that anyone does who is working that way. But I was told that I can put anything I want in a poem. And so way, yeah. Well, I have that poem in conflict resolution, the rabbit poem, and there's ways to do it. I've just hunkered down and written this piece to talk to younger people, to grandchildren, to who will be listening, those who will be listening and writing poetry and music. It's so my editor at Norton says that I reinvented memoir, and because it's so much about poetry and about kind of a state of the art. So, well, like it was her idea to call it A Call for Love and Justice. I was going to call it, the whole book is For Justice, for Love. That's how I used to sign my name all the time, my signature. And then she said, Poet Warrior, A Call for Love and Justice. And okay, that works because that's what it's about. But yeah, it has somewhat, but people know me for who I am, and I do speak out. I just can't speak out particularly.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It leads to our next question, which is, I'd like to know about the historical passages in An American Sunrise. How did you choose them? Did they come first, or did the poems come first, or perhaps a combination? So I guess the relationship between your poetry and history.
Yeah, I think it was a combination. I mean, a book is its own thing. I write the poems, and I didn't write the poems to the historical passages, but I found them. I had so many more too, of course, that I could have done, and things I think I would have liked to put in here. But I was just trying to put them in to give a sense of, well, even a map tells a story. The map of the Trail of Tears for Manawi and his family, and then the Fish Pond Miko and his family. There were a lot of different Trails of Tears, and most people don't. I wanted people to know that too. It's like the Cherokees weren't the only Trail of Tears. There were many. There were the 5 quote unquote civilized tribes, but all kinds of tribal people were moved to Oklahoma. The Navajo people were moved from their homes down into what is it called? Redondo, to a fort out in the Texas-like plains of southeastern Texas for a while, where they suffered. There was, so I wanted people to get a sense of history. That, I think every poem that anyone writes, somehow, it may not directly relate to history, but the poem couldn't emerge without, the poetry emerges from particular times and places.
I would like to ask, you mentioned, I think we're almost out of time. We almost are, but I would just, before we leave, you mentioned the rabbit poem, and that's one of my favorite poems, but it's also humorous, and in an ironic, paradoxical kind of way, right? So I'm wondering about, paradox. You say you're haunted by paradox. I love that line in Crazy Brave, where you say, I was haunted by a paradox. If there is such beauty, why are we suffering? If there is such beauty, why are we suffering? Do you want to leave us with that thought, Joy?
It's the thought that I'm not the only one, that everyone asks that. Everyone who has emerged into this world and taken on the story by breath. Because when we come in, we take a breath, and that's like a promise. It says, okay, I'm in the story field now, and I'm part of it. And I'm going to, by taking this breath, it's a promise that I'm going to go forward. I might be come out screaming about it or whatever, but I'm in the story. And I've wondered often what use human beings are in this biosphere. I still haven't figured it out, but I do know that every human being is a story. We're story makers, and we're story gatherers. That's what we do. We make, however we do it. we might be story gatherers about cars, or about lexicons or this, that, or the other, or poetry, or poetry making. But that's what we humans do. And I think that's always there at the, you probably wouldn't have a story without that paradox. It's probably embedded in every
That's right.
urge or to need to tell a story.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And for those of you watching, I would recommend, Joy has just put out a new anthology. When the light of the world was subdued, our songs came through. This is an amazing anthology of writings, poetry by Native Nations people. And so I hope I can't do it on the screen, I'm sorry. I hope you can purchase this quickly and wonderfully and get much joy from it. I will just do that. So thank you so much, Joy Harjo, for this wonderful gift.
Thank you, Amy. It's good to see you again.